It is time, once again, for Tweets of the Week. These are tweets and news stories and clips that I collect throughout the week that I want to share with people, so let's get started. First up, when I say Tweets of the Week, I don't mean they're all good ones. This is from the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire. Legalize child labor. Children will learn more on a job site than in public school. This is a verified account. This is a real party. This is a real position. This reminds me of this clip from, I'm sure you're all familiar with this by now, but this is a clip from a Libertarian Party debate. I believe this is, I think this is 2016 because Gary Johnson's there. But check out this clip. It is, as Know Nothing says here, the same energy.
Should someone have to have a government-issued license to drive a car?
Hell no.
What's next? Requiring a license to make toast in your own damn toaster?
The license to drive? You know, I'd like to see some competency exhibited by people before they drive.
That clip gets me every time. It is so ridiculous. So ridiculous. God, how can anyone be a libertarian? Anyway, that's amazing. Next one. Beth Miller here shared this, actually shared this tweet in another video, but I thought this was a great tweet that I want to share it again. Imagine if we lived in a world where the headline was this. So let me first show you what the headline on the story is. Showdown over Omar's comments exposes sharp divisions among Democrats. So I covered this story now essentially twice. On Monday, I covered her comments towards Secretary Blinken, discussing why Biden administration, or why don't they support the ability for victims in Palestine to go or to go to the ICC, the International Criminal Court, and have an investigation of what's going on by the Israeli government, and by the way, also Hamas. So anyways, I covered that a couple times. But of course, there was some outrage from Democrats that I covered yesterday about Ilhan Omar's comments that are so ridiculous. Her comments were fine. Nothing was wrong with them. But the way they frame this whole story here, the New York Times, is, oh, this is a division among Democrats. They're having this fight. The headline could have been, Member of Congress demands answers from State Department for victims of war crimes. Because that's ultimately what this story is about. But you have here a media that instead is driven towards this sort of, drama. And in one way, I understand it. Sometimes you need to elevate the drama in a headline to get the clicks. I've done that for sure. So I totally hear that. Because oftentimes, or not often, but sometimes, there are certain stories that are kind of boring on their face. So you have to kind of, make them sexy so people will actually listen and be educated. But when it comes to the New York Times, I just feel there's a different level there where you should expect more of them, and being able to, because New York Times essentially sets, places like New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, MSNBC, they often set the narratives. So they have to take a leadership position here in actually correctly framing what these discussions are about. So instead of doing that, they go towards the drama. This is great. So Jordan, you will hear tweeting out, it's cool to see someone learn world history in real time. So if you don't know, Sagar and Crystal started their own podcast. They have left The Hills Rising. And for now, anyways, you have Ryan Grimm. And honestly, I forget this lady's name, but she is a conservative, Ashley something. She's from The Federalist. But watch this exchange, and it really is just, it shows you the complete difference between someone on the left who is educated and knows what they're talking about versus a conservative who is just a complete reactionary.
You could throw a dart anywhere at the global map, and you can probably find, at some point throughout the 20th century, the U.S. intervening to undermine, some type of social democratic effort and backing the most vicious right-wing elements. And the irony of them calling this anti-Semitism when the U.S. very consciously and explicitly out of World War II allied itself with former Nazis, helped Nazis escape justice, was complicit in what was called the rat line, with getting Nazis out of Germany and into these death squads that were run by the United States and deployed in an anti-communist fashion against the Soviet Union and against leftist elements in South America.
But who ended the Holocaust? I mean, what country?
The Soviet Union, actually.
Okay, but
I mean, the Soviet Union did that.
No,
We
the Soviet
walked
Union...
in after the Russians had suffered 20+ million casualties and marched into Germany.
Sure, but without the United States' intervention, a heck of a lot more people would have died in that atrocity.
Yes, and I'm glad the Soviet Union and the United States allied to beat Nazi Germany, but the Nazi Germany, the Nazis themselves then allied with the United States to go after the Soviet Union and to go after communist and social democratic elements in South America. That's an actual part of the history.
Right, but again, there's lives being saved in that process, a lot of lives being saved in that process, and a lot of Americans putting their lives on the line and dying to save those lives. Sure,
but many fewer than Soviet lives died.
I enjoy that. It's just, it shows you how little you have to know to become a conservative commentator. I mean, yeah, I don't know what really else to add to that. It's just, I hope these are the new hosts, but I heard some chatter online that apparently they're going to show who the new hosts are on the 14th. So I don't know. We'll find out. But this would be a great duo going forward, as I think the audience, especially a right-wing audience, would learn quite a bit from Ryan Grimm and his teachings here. All right. Next one. I just saw this story. Dimitri Lascaris shared this, saying 23-year-old Israeli refused to serve in Israel's military because it is a system that oppresses people, denies their rights, and maintains a regime that is racist, discriminatory, and belligerent. She then spent 110 days in military prison. So, I mean, this raises the point where if Israel won't even stand up for its own citizens, what's the chance of them standing up for Palestinians? So it really is, we're talking about a mindset that is, and a government here that is rotten to the core, and they have to, address their own issues here before there's any hope of them recognizing the humanity of Palestinians. Max Berger here tweeted out, "It's weird how Democrats aren't socialists, but Republicans say they are, and many Republicans are fascists, but Democrats won't say they are." This is just a microcosm of how weak the Democratic Party is and how aggressive Republicans are. The GOP will lie and lie and lie to fight and get what they want. Democrats won't even acknowledge that reality is on their side. But ultimately, again, this is about Democratic leadership, not necessarily about the entire party. Obviously, there are certain members of the party that are better than others and actually do call this stuff out. But leadership, Democratic leadership, has been garbage for decades at this point, and it's time for a change. Michael Buchert here. By the way, every time I see his name, I think I'm saying it right, but I feel like I've heard it differently. But Michael, if I got your name wrong, I'm sorry. But he tweeted out here, just this year, the word apartheid has been adopted to describe Israel by B'Tselem, Human Rights Watch, the post-apartheid governments of South Africa and Namibia, and 2 former Israeli ambassadors to South Africa. Canada rejects the word categorically. Whose opinion would you trust? So this is in response to this short clip. Let me just play this. The Liberal Party here categorically rejecting the idea that Israel is an apartheid state.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will simply say that the position of the Liberal government is extremely clear on the question of the apartheid label. We reject it categorically. It is not part of our approach with respect to the Israel or the Jewish community, and we, of course, are completely against any anti-Semitism that would be displayed by any Canadian citizen.
So ridiculous. The idea of criticisms of the Israeli government, that is somehow anti-Semitic, is so, as I've discussed a billion times, so stupid. And Canada clearly here is on the wrong side of history. It may not be obvious to the party right now, but it's going to be obvious to them in hopefully 10, 20, if we have to get there, years. But at some point, it will become obvious just how wrong people or parties like the liberals and others who are unwilling to call out Israel's human rights abuses. It'll be so clear just how wrong they were. And actually, one more tweet on that. In fact, 45% of those living between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea believe apartheid is an appropriate term, including a quarter of Jewish Israelis. Which, by the way, worth mentioning here, B'Tselem is an Israeli human rights group, the largest Israeli human rights group, and they have called Israel an apartheid state. Iris here tweeting out, my work unionized and I got a $14,000 raise. Don't ever let them convince you you don't need a union. There you go. And she shouts out her union. So there's a lot of anti-union activity out there. Of course, I covered Amazon's anti-union behaviors recently in the attempt to unionize a warehouse in the South in Alabama. But here you have it's important. I think if you're in a union and it's benefited you, tell your story, because there's been so much anti-union propaganda that's been put out over the years. I know, before I ever got into politics and began to learn and understand a lot of this stuff, I had a very negative opinion of unions as somebody who was in high school, because I was just told all the time how horrible they were. So it's important to put your voice out there, let your voice be heard, and discuss your experience and how being in a union has benefited you. Last thing here. This exchange between Chris Hayes and Bernie Sanders is pretty funny.
Are the Democrats going to make the decision at some point that they are going to pass this alone or not? And is that a possibility? And should we have faith that they can get there?
Well, faith, that's a big word in Washington, D.C. But,
that is not a reassuring answer, Senator.
It's like if you want a friend, get a dog, something like that.
That is, wow, that is depressing. Bernie here, usually Bernie is very, hopeful that things are going to work out in the end. But here he seems very down on the idea that Democrats will actually be able to get anything done. But we're going to see. And as I covered during this live stream, Democrats right now are becoming more vocal about rejecting Biden's continued capitulations to Republicans on the infrastructure bill. So you had Ed Markey, AOC, of course, but also people like Michael Bennett come out and say they're not going to vote for Biden's infrastructure plan if it does not center the climate crisis. So by having Democrats come together like that and vote as a block potentially against any sort of bill that is too right wing, then finally there may be some power taken back here and the ability to get something done in the future. But of course, it also relies on the filibuster, or if they can use budget reconciliation. So, and then also you still need Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema's vote. So you can see why Bernie is not all that optimistic, because there is all signs right now point to Joe Biden getting nothing else passed, because the filibuster's still there. He's not really fighting either Manchin or Sinema, so they need 60 votes to get anything through. At the end of the day, unless Biden makes a serious change in his strategy and actually fights for the agenda he pretended to care about when he was campaigning, then ultimately nothing is going to get done. But there you go, your tweets of the week.